Okay, try as I might, I couldn't get the video that I had promised you to upload and be put on YouTube, so I decided that I would do it again. So here we are. I'm going to talk about where the righteous people went when they died, because I named my video that, and then I stopped before. Anyway, it didn't get on there. So one day I was just thinking, where did the righteous people go in the Old Testament before they died? Because the Bible doesn't tell us. And I know they didn't go to heaven because Jesus was the first to rise from the dead. And so I started studying about death and how they thought back then, because it's a whole new, we live in the New Testament, so it's a whole new thing now. So as I'm studying it, I realized that they believed that their fathers slept. They would say, and so slept with his fathers, so that to them death was sleep. They had a place that they went called Sheol, and Sheol, if you look it up in the concordance, it means a place under the ground where it was like a kingdom under the ground that the dead people went. So I knew God would not put the righteous people with the unrighteous people. So, you think there's questions that you should not know the answer to, but I have learned that everything that we can think of, God has an answer to it, and all we have to do is ask. So I asked the Lord one night, where did the righteous people go when they died? And then I went to sleep. Well, the next morning, I wake up to this loud, resounding voice in my head saying, cities of refuge. And I went, what was that? And the Lord said, what did you ask me before you went to sleep? And I had to think, what did I ask the Lord before I went to sleep? And I realized I asked you where the righteous people went when they died. So he goes, well, that's your answer. So I started studying about cities of refuge, and I had studied cities of refuge before, but never in that light. So I'm going to read out of Numbers 35. And the Lord said that when they came to their land, they were supposed to command the people of Israel to give to the Levites from their property certain towns to live in, along the surrounding pasture lands. These towns will be for the Levites to live in, and the surrounding lands will provide pasture for their cattle, flocks, and other livestock. And then it goes on down to verse 9. It says, the Lord said to Moses, give the following instructions to the people of Israel. When you cross the Jordan into the land of Canaan, designate cities of refuge to which people can flee if they have killed someone accidentally. These cities will be places of protection from a dead person's relatives who want to avenge the death. The slayer must not be put to death before being tried by the community. Designate 6 cities of refuge for yourselves, 3 on the east side of the Jordan River and 3 on the west in the land of Canaan. These cities are for the protection of Israelites, foreigners living among you, and traveling merchants. Anyone who accidentally kills someone may flee there for safety. But if someone strikes and kills another person with a piece of iron, it is murder, and murder must be executed. Or if someone with a stone in his hand strikes and kills another person, it is murder, and the murderer must be put to death. Or if someone strikes and kills another person with a wooden object, it is murder, and the murderer must be put to death. The victim's nearest relatives is responsible for putting the murderer to death. When they meet, the avenger must put the murderer to death. So if someone hates another person and pushes him or throws a dangerous object at him and he dies, it is murder. Or if someone hates another person and hits him with a fist and he dies, it is murder. In such cases, the avenger must put the murderer to death when they meet. But suppose someone pushes another person without having shown previous hostility, or throws something that unintentionally hits another person, or accidentally drops a huge stone on someone, though they were not enemies, and the person dies. If this should happen, the community must follow these regulations in making a judgment between the slayer and the avenger, the victim's nearest relative. The community must protect the slayer from the avenger and must escort the slayer back to live in the city of refuge to which he fled. There he must remain until the death of the high priest who was anointed with the sacred oil. But if the slayer ever leaves the limits of the city of refuge, and the avenger finds him outside the city and kills him, it will not be considered murder. The slayer should have stayed inside the city of refuge until the death of the high priest. But after the death of the high priest, the slayer may return to his own property. These are legal requirements for you to observe from generation to generation wherever you may live. All murderers must be put to death, but only if evidence is presented by more than one witness. No one may be put to death on the testimony of only one witness. Also, you must never accept a ransom payment for the life of someone judged guilty of murder and subject to execution. Murderers must always be put to death. And never accept a ransom payment for someone who has fled to a city of refuge, allowing a slayer to return to his property before the death of the high priest. This will ensure that the land wherever you live will not be polluted, for murder pollutes the land, and no sacrifice except the execution of the murderer can purify the land from murder. You must not defile the land where you live, for I live there myself. I am the Lord who lives among the people of Israel. So, what does that mean to us? And what does that mean to, in light of where the righteous people went when they died? Okay, Sheol was a place under the earth where dead people rested until their judgment time. And their judge was Jesus. And so Jesus hadn't come to earth yet. So they rested there until then. So the cities of refuge were places under the earth where the righteous people went. So I started studying these different cities of refuge, and I found that Hebron, which means communion, was a city of refuge. Well, remember how Abraham was so adamant about finding and buying this cave for him to bury Sarah in. Well, lo and behold, that cave and that land where Sarah, Abraham, Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, and Leah were all buried became the city of Hebron. At one time it was called Kiriath Arba, and then down through the time it became a city of refuge. Also, interesting, Shechem was another city of refuge, and Aaron was buried there. So the priests. So I don't know if certain tribes were buried in different, well, they had different cities of refuge within the tribes. So I guess you were born in you were buried in the tribe of your city of refuge. And remember when Joseph died in Egypt, he said, "Do not leave my bones here in Egypt. Take them with you." Well, his bones were buried in Shechem, I believe. Yes. His bones were buried in, well, I think that's, yes, in Shechem. You can look in Genesis 50:25 and Joshua 24:32. Because they realized that where their bones rested was where they would spend eternity. So it mattered where they died. So if you weren't in a city of refuge, you apparently were being tormented by the avenger of blood, and because you were an unrighteous person and you were a murderer here on earth. When Jesus died, it says that he who ascended also descended into the inner parts of the earth and preached captivity captive. So he went to these cities of refuge. Remember, you got to be set free from a city of refuge at the death of the high priest. So Jesus is our high priest. So when he died, he went down and preached captivity captive. He took the keys to death, hell, and the grave, and he let them free. In the end of Matthew, which I didn't look up, but it says that people walked the earth. I'm going to try to see if I can find it real quick. Walked the earth and appeared in the streets of Jerusalem. Every time I say this, people go, "You're kidding me." And so I would love to find it. But I think it's in, yes, here it is. Matthew 27:52. Well, let me start out with 50. And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice, he's on the cross, and yielded up his spirit. Then behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth quaked, and the rocks were split, and the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the graves after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. So, so there you have it. The graves were opened, and people were brought out, actually walking the cities until Jesus rose, because Jesus was the first fruit to rise from the dead. If you understand the feasts, you understand that every feast Jesus fulfilled, and he rose on first fruits because he was the first fruit to rise from the dead. And then he took with him many others, but he went down and got them, and then he took them, and then they walked upon the earth. I mean, how cool is that? So anyway, I wanted to answer that question because I didn't get it